Hi, we're in my bedroom. Do I look pretty? Do I look pretty today? You like it? Today we're doing things a little bit differently. I decided I wanted to film this video off the cuff. And normally I reserve these videos to talk about things that I love because I feel like often there's too much criticism in the world of film analysis. People love to just shit on stuff and talk about what they hate because it tends to get better views, possibly. However, today I will also just be shitting on something. And that thing is Don't Worry Darling, directed by Olivia Wilde. So let's get stuck in. The worst thing about this movie is that it could have been so good. I think Olivia Wilde is a competent director, but it has some really significant failings in the screenplay. And the issues I have with the screenplay are not to do with the dialogue, but it's to do with the actual storytelling, the way it's paced, the plot beats it decides to focus on. As far as I'm concerned, Don't Worry Darling has three main failings, and I'm going to explain why these run the film into the ground before it even gets going. Lots of people have made comparisons between Don't Worry Darling and films like Truman Show or Stepford Wives and The Stepford Wife. And I think there is some validity to those comparisons, but I also feel like they are a lot more surface level. They don't really relate to the themes of the film, in my personal opinion. Stepford Wife kind of, Truman Show not really at all. But the one thing that I think it is noticeably comparable to, that I don't think I've seen anyone talk about, is Black Mirror's season 4 episode, SS Callister. Don't Worry Darling has almost the exact same plot as Callister, but nowhere near the depth. And the two films do differ in some obvious ways, like visually they're nothing alike. Actually, I was gonna say they're set in different timelines, but they're not, because they are actually ultimately both set in the modern day, and they both have a heavy reliance on technology that doesn't actually currently exist. But they also differ regarding the beats of the plot, because where in Callister, the fact that it's a simulation isn't a twist. In Don't Worry Darling, it's the reveal played towards the very end, which we'll talk about later. Both see women trying to escape from a simulated world, one that was created by a man that in some way wants to keep her contained. Both stories ultimately center around disenfranchised men who want to feel powerful and create or buy into these simulated worlds in order to have a place where they can act on that. In recent years, we have seen a shift where men, despite ultimately still holding most of the most powerful positions in the world, and even on a small scale in businesses, like every place that I've worked at has had a male CEO, every single one. But we're seeing this shift where a lot of younger men in particular feel very disenfranchised by the current state of the world. And the fact that women are finally starting to climb up some of those ladders and actually reach a point of equity is something that these young men have a real problem with. And that's driven by people like Andrew Tate and other such outspoken misogynists. Ultimately, that is what they are. I mean, Andrew Tate is like a literal sex trafficker. And this dynamic is something Don't Worry Darling touches on, wanted to explore, could have explored. But it's something that Callister actually does really well. In the first few minutes of the show, we see the man without eyebrows in his fantasy world. The ladies love him and he's making all the decisions and he's on the spaceship and he's really important. And we're like, ooh, wow. Yeah, we actually probably aren't like, ooh, wow. But we understand that he's supposed to be empowered. Then we see him at work. We see that people ignore him, don't take him seriously, laugh at him behind his back, even find him a bit creepy with women. It takes the time to give us a real impression of why this man in his real life does feel neglected and rejected. And this has a great effect on the way the rest of this story plays out, because you actually start off feeling sorry for him. What's scary and what's highlighted in Callister is that though we might have hope for people like that, what often happens is when they do find themselves in a situation where they get a small amount of power, it's completely abused. And I think this is reflected in the way that when incels come together on forums online, they've gone from being a group of insecure people full of self-hatred who, now that they have collectivized, feel empowered to actually do harm and spread hateful rhetoric about women. How sorry I felt for Callister when the episode started was just chipped away and away and away as it carried on. And you saw that he was so willing to act on his revenge fantasies. So yeah, I think Callister handles this kind of incel right-wing man thing really well. It actually does give some empathy, it gives multiple perspectives, which I think is good because it's like you don't want to alienate people with your message. But I do think it ultimately lands on the side of things that I personally think is morally right. That being that Callister is reprimanded for his hateful choices and that the people he was trying to get his revenge on are free. So anyway, Don't Worry Darling has a similar backdrop to SS Callister. They lean slightly less into the he's an incel thing and slightly more into the he's a right-wing man thing, because we do actually see that Alice and whatever Harry Styles' name is, they were like in a relationship, and then you see his kind of descent into, I don't even know if they ever say it's like right-wing in the film, but that's obviously what it is supposed to be mirroring. His kind of descent into this like right-wing online space, and he's feeling disenfranchised. How many times have I said that word in this video? He's feeling downtrodden, downcast. He feels like he's not living in the society that he feels he belongs in or wants to be in. And this is a little bit less to do with other people directly shitting on him in the way that it is in Callister, and more that like society in general has become a place that he doesn't want to be in. Harry Styles doesn't want to be in it. The issue that I have with Don't Worry Darling is that we kind of find out some of that basic stuff about Harry. You get some kind of quick montagey flashback backdrop stuff, and then that's just it. I don't feel like they really went into that film with a deeper understanding of the mindset of those kinds of men. There is a lack of genuine exploration or even empathy for that character. It doesn't feel like the film really knows how people like that think. It just feels like a really surface level interpretation. It's social commentary without the social commentary. It's just saying, look at this thing. It exists. Did you know? And for pretty much no one apart from people that are never online, it's not news. Like, that's not a surprise to anyone to just be like, did you know that some men are not good? Like, and I think that's why it was so disappointing. Like, this idea has been done before and it's been done better. So if you're not actually gonna try and explore it, why bother? It could have been really interesting to explore how someone ends up in this kind of incel, it's a man's world, I was born in the wrong generation kind of online community. And it just didn't bother to do that. It used it as a punchline and then left it from there. And this brings me to my next point. Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. I couldn't just film the video in one outfit. We're giving 80s power suit. We're giving women in the workplace. We're giving Rihanna. Failing number 2 of Don't Worry Darling is that the twist came way too late. Unfortunately, due to a lot of the advertising surrounding it and because of people having brains, the twist of this film was blatantly obvious from day dot. The trailer took a lot of wind out of the film's release, as it was so clear that Alice, the main character of Don't Worry Darling, was living in some sort of unreal world where she is going to turn out to be fake, even down to the fact that the main character's name is Alice. Everything in this film was indicating the fact that the plot twist was going to be, ooh, none of this is real. Even if you don't know the specifics or the why behind it all, this really kills the suspense. And I'm actually really surprised, given that it already had 2 really famous people in it, Florence Pugh and Harry Styles, and given that Olivia Wilde had a very successful run with Booksmart, that they weren't confident enough that people would come and see the film if it had more subtle, simple advertising. And I know as well that the way that trailers are made, they're often not actually made by the same like producing company or distribution company or whatever as the actual film. I've worked in production companies that basically do that kind of like secondary step of once a film already exists. And you don't always have a lot of control as a director, so I don't blame Olivia Wilde for that, of course. However, it just does seem like a really stupid decision when you consider critical reception. All of the focus was put on getting people into cinema seats. They wanted to present upfront that it was a mystery, that it was a thriller, that there was a twist. Don't tell people there's gonna be a twist. So yeah, the only thing that you're left not knowing is the why. Why is all this happening? What are the specifics? You spend about 1.5 hours. I actually don't know if that's true. I can't remember how long this film is. But let's say you spend about 1.5 hours, like over 2/3 of the film, waiting to find out the reason. If anything, the fact that you go in knowing that this film has a twist is actually what makes it so boring. You spend the whole time just waiting to get there. And if the reveal isn't spectacular, which, as I've said in this case, it wasn't because they just didn't use that twist to provide any real like depth or commentary, then what's the point? Moving this reveal up to the first half an hour, heck, even the first like 15 minutes, would have actually allowed the film to do something with this new information. Because instead, we get it and it's like, yep, that's what we thought. The world she's in isn't real. And like, and then yeah, she gets out and that's the end. So we don't even know what happens on the other side. That's where we could have had the real exploration. You know, if everything that was in the trailer was just the first half an hour of the film. And then it's like we see for the rest of the film, things like Florence Pugh, Alice, trying to find the other women that were in the simulation, using clues that she'd picked up on when she was in that world to try and find them in the real world. There are other questions to be answered. Like, did she destroy the simulation when she got out of it? What does that mean happens to all of the other people that are in it? What happens when she gets out on the real world and is actually faced with Harry Styles? A terrifying thought. There just were so many possibilities that you could have gone down if that twist came early. As a random side note, just when it comes to talking about the other women in the simulation, I actually really like that Bunny, played by Olivia Wilde, wanted to stay in that world. Like, I think that was actually a really interesting point that the film made, and it's kind of reflective of the type of women that also agree that living in like a man's world or living in the 50s or whatever is better for them for specific reasons. Like, that's not the actual reason in the film, it's allegorical. The reason in the film is all of these different factors come into these women's decisions about whether they want to fight or whether they're complacent or happy. That was cool. And again, exploring that on the outside and having an arc where Bunny realizes that having children isn't her whole life and that she can be fulfilled without them. So yeah, that was a nice parallel, but wasted, but squandered like everything else. So finally we get to failing number 3. And this doesn't really have anything to do with the plot of the film, so for some people this might seem kind of arbitrary. But my third significant issue with this was the imagery. So I actually think Olivia Wilde is a good director. I think she's only directed Booksmart. Let's find out. Oh my god, just show me what she's directed. Oh, okay. I've done the research and clarified. She's only directed one film, that being Booksmart. But Booksmart was a comedy teen coming of age film, and films like that don't tend to typically rely on having like an incredible visual impact. And I think that is something that she's not shown in her work. She hasn't shown that she is a visual director. But visual communication in this type of film, a film that's psychological, a drama, I guess it kind of is a sci-fi. It's too important in films like this to be done cheaply or stereotypically. So what is so bad about it? Some of you might be thinking, what are you talking about? This film looked great, it looked good. And like, it does in some ways look good. But I do have some specific issues. The first of which being that it's so derivative, like everything visually just feels like we've seen it before. And even the things that are unique to the film, like the empty egg cracking, you see it in the trailer. So when you see it in the film, it doesn't feel special. We have like the ballet dance with the mirror that feels like Black Swan, and all of the like shit that she sees when she puts her hand up to the thing. Even that kind of feels like it was supposed to have echoes of like Suspiria 2018. Like there's a lot of dancing, and it's like, why are we dancing? Why are we dancing in this film? What does that have anything to do with anything? There was nothing in that film that felt like fresh and brand new, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. Like in the way that I've already mentioned Black Swan, I shall mention it again. There are so many bits in that film that you just like really remember, like Lily's back when she's eating her out. And you see like the wings on her tattoo like ripple and move, and when she pulls that thing out of her back and she's like looking at it like right in front of her eyes. Stuff like that makes a film. And if it's good, it can stay in your mind for years. Another issue I had with the visuals on Don't Worry Darling, it just felt very tacky. And taste level is a weird thing to talk about because obviously like everybody has differing opinions on it. In many ways, criticizing the taste level of a film, it's stupid. We all think we have good taste. If you think you have bad taste, I applaud you. But like with my existing beliefs on that, Don't Worry Darling does fall into the category of like tacky imagery. It feels like stuff you would see on like a high school student's photography board. I think a film I'd compare it to specifically when it comes to taste level is Last Night in Soho, which I actually liked a lot about that film, but it was really let down by some goofy, tacky visuals. It's putting like a bold red light on stuff to tell you that it's like spooky and weird and scary, and it's like fast like flashes of people like moving their heads and stuff like that to be like, ooh, kooky, ooky. And I think if you have in any way delved into more elevated horror particularly, or just kind of psychological cinema, stuff like that begins to feel really juvenile. It feels like the most basic reading of what is dark, what is disturbing. So yeah, Don't Worry Darling wants to be Black Swan, but unfortunately it is Last Night in Soho, and that's either going to mean something to you or it's not. And then my third issue with the imagery is just that a lot of it's pointless. I said that before about the dances. Like, what does that really have to do with this film? I'm sure people are going to comment and be like, oh, this actually meant that and this actually meant this, and like that's great, but if it doesn't read in the film, not everybody wants to go out and research everything and find Easter eggs, and that can be really fascinating. But not if you have to do it to justify whether something is good. Again, it's like with the egg, with the empty thing, that's just for the audience. It's just saying to the audience, something here is wrong. Like, it doesn't mean anything within the context of the film. The bit where she gets like crushed by the glass, it doesn't mean anything. Like, perhaps that's supposed to be saying that there's some sort of software error in the simulation, but it's not like a wall is glitching where you could immediately look at that and be like, yes, that's reading as a computer error. But yeah, I feel like they just wanted, for the sake of making it seem more psychological, they just wanted to add some crazy, freaky imagery that echoes the shattered mind of the protagonist. But it's lame. If that doesn't come from like a real place, it is lame. I'm sorry to Ollie Wilde, but I do not think your comedy chops translate to horror. Was this film a horror? Not really. But these were the parts of the film that wanted to borrow from the genre in order to have an impact. And that's all it was. It was borrowing. The heartbreak of the film is that it could have been good. And they made some mistakes at the very earliest stages in that screenplay. I also, to be honest, again, as much as I like Olivia Wilde, I don't think she was the director for this film. I think, unfortunately, we'll never see the version of this film that could have been great. And it's a real shame for Florence Pugh as well, because she's such a good actress. But thankfully, it strayed so far away from the things that would have made it good that somebody else might actually be able to make a film that is trying to do all the same things, but actually manages to do them successfully without it needing to be a remake of Don't Worry, Darling. And that, my friends, brings us to the end. Just like, don't shoot people because no one wants to date you. It's just like not nice.